For early access plus exclusive content, facilitated discussions, live one-on-one Q&As, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePointset. Welcome back to the Blacktastic Adventure. I'm your host, Bruce Pointset. And on today's episode, I speak with Amber Starks. Amber is an Afro Indigenous or Black and Native American activist. She is an enrolled citizen of the Muscogee Nation or the Creek Nation, and is also of Shawnee, Yuchi, Quapaw, and Cherokee descent. Her passion is the intersection of Black and Native identity, where she seeks to normalize, affirm, and uplift the multidimensional identities of Black and Native peoples, and to encourage Black and Indigenous peoples to prioritize one another and divest from the compartmentalizing struggles. Her pronouns are she, her, and hers. This conversation was, it's a long time coming. And as I talk with Amber in the interview, it's funny, the last time we spoke was for the state of Black Oregon. And at the time, she had just come off of really spearheading the efforts to pass natural hair legislation in the Oregon legislature, and hadn't really done this deep dive into her Native ancestry. So a lot has happened since then, and we talk all about it. Check it out. Amber, welcome to the Blacktastic Adventure. Thank you for coming on today. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm really good. I'm busy, feeling tired, but that's because I have a little one who just started kindergarten and I'm up way earlier than I want to be. But these are the sacrifices you make, for the little people you love. But I'm learning to navigate that world. Not being a morning person. But yeah, it's good. Life is busy, but busy because I've chosen a lot of the things that I'm busy about, But yeah, it's good. It's like all of us, I think. We're just navigating. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, kind of in a similar space where life is busy, but I feel like again, because I'm choosing a lot of the ways in which it is busy, I feel in a good place. And as we were kind of talking about before we start recording, I guess the kids thing kind of like puts it in perspective for me. Just one, when you talk about take the kids to school at 5 something in the morning, but then also just watching like I have to imagine just with some of the stories of like some of the outbreaks in all these different districts, that's got to be another kind of stressful as a parent.
For sure. I mean, I think most of us parents are trying to figure out what's best, with the limited options we feel like we have, right? It's like, do you keep kids home? Do you risk it? Do you, like what's best for them? I tend to be on the more cautious side when it comes to my little one, because in the end, it's like I want her to have a healthy life. I want her to be safe. But geez, I think a lot of this reminds me of, puts a lot of things in perspective as far as like how much control do we really have, And I think as someone who likes to be in control, the pandemic in general has taught me what I actually, what my limitations of control are. So I think I'm learning to be flexible, but also trying to really think about like risk, what my level of risk is, and I don't have to just do that for myself now. Like I have a little person who's, that's not even something they have to think about, right? And that's not something they should have to think about. But it's like I'm thinking about me plus them, and I think that even, early on during the pandemic, it was really a really interesting thing to, I think all of us are thinking about how we're feeling, like we're navigating, how stressed we are, how overwhelmed we are, when's this going to end? But then I also seeing my little one navigate that. And so it's like I'm navigating that for me and I'm navigating that for, them. And so it is it was really hard early on because you want to protect your little one. You want to make sure that they're not stressed out about it. They're not, they're missing their friends. They can't go to the playground. They can't, all those things. And so you're in the house with them. And I can only imagine if I had more than one, I think it would have been emotionally a lot harder. I have friends who say it was a little easier for them because if they had two, at least they could play with each other. But I was like my little one's, best friend, teacher, cook, mom, everything wraps into one. And there were points where like, I can no longer sing that song again. Like I am going to throw the TV out the window, like you're just like, I don't have the capacity to do 4-year-old, 24/7, but I also feel like there was a lot of time of bonding, Um, I feel like we got even closer than we were, which is interesting to say because the first 2 years of their life, I was, I didn't work as much. I was with, like, they didn't go to preschool until 3. And so I think that we had bonded a lot. But then, a year and a half after they had been in preschool, then we had the shutdown. And then I was back again, that thing, that person in their life. And so, at some point, I realized they need to be in preschool. Like they need to be around other kids and socialize. And so then having, the universe be like, nope, we're going back. um, it was definitely a transition for me. And, but yeah, I think that we bonded a lot more. And so, um, yeah, it's just been a really interesting time. Like, I think COVID really shook the world up. But I also, and I say this not saying that we needed this to happen, but I think that it really did show us ourselves in a lot of ways, right? Like, I think COVID and being on lockdown, at least for me, really made me stop and slow down in a lot of ways. I think before COVID, I was working a lot, and I think who I am today, like I grew in such a short amount of time because I was almost forced to, right? And
Mhm.
I think I even had to really sit back and think about, my emotional and physical and mental health, because so much was happening at one time. And so I think it really kind of forced this growth that I don't know that would have happened, without, this, which is horrible, right? Like I hate that it took this because I think about people who have, lost their lives and whose lives have been, unmistakably changed by the pandemic. Um, you know, I would never wish this to happen in order for like my personal growth. I think is what I'm trying to communicate. So I'm trying to find the goodness in what seems to be, or what is really has been a terrible event, for a lot of people,
Right, right. I mean, like you said, you don't want to, romanticize mass trauma events,
Yes,
but at the same time, it's like these things do, they do force us to grow as human beings. They do, or at least force us really to just, I guess, really look at, like you said, like who we really are. And,
yes,
we learn a lot about ourselves and our fellow humans for better or worse
yes.
during these moments. We will say it like that. But yeah, we're talking offline. The last time we spoke, I guess like person to person anyway, was back for the Urban League of Portland State of Black Oregon report. So that's I want to say like 2014, around
Yeah.
then. So a little bit has happened since then. I remember I was following you, on social media, and I remember last time, at least last time I remember, like specifically under Amber Stark, it's like
Yes.
you talked about taking a, social media break or something like that. I hadn't heard from you. I was like, I wonder what Amber's doing, wonder what Amber's up to these days. And I remember someone had posted, this quote from this account, Melanin Muscogee. I was like, oh, this is what's going on here. And then, I click and follow, and it's like, Amber, what? Things have happened.
Yeah.
There have been some developments. Yeah, could you just talk about, this kind of like really connecting with your native ancestry, and also just like, if you don't mind saying, like, obviously talk about like Muskogee, but like what tribes, you are, the tribes you're part of.
Yes. So I want to preface this as saying, I never intended Melanin Muskogee to be what Melanin Muskogee is. But so from the beginning, a couple years ago, my dad passed away. And, in my grief, I was, trying to connect with him. Like, how do I connect with, this person who I love so deeply, who now, like, there feels like there's this cavern between us that is, uncrossable, like there's no way for me to get to the other side. Like, he's so far gone. And I think in a lot of ways, I just I was looking for him, Sorry, I'm like, this brings up grief, brings up your grief. It
No
reminded
worries,
me
take your
of,
time.
So I think that I was, trying to find him again. And sorry. So I think that.
Want me to pause it?
No, it's okay. I think I was asking myself, like, who am I, without him? You know, I don't want to forget him. I don't want to forget, like, the love we have for each other, all those things. And so one of the things, like, when I was younger, my dad would always remind me, your creek, and as a kid, I didn't really know what that meant because I didn't grow up around my tribe, my nation, in community with my people. But it was a constant reminder. And every year my dad would go to Oklahoma to visit my grandmother, my great grandmother, or at least my great grandmother, because my grandmother wasn't living there at the time. And, that was always important for him to go back to Oklahoma, where my tribe and, my family was. And so there was always like this thing that, your Creek or your Muskogee, but it was an identity that I didn't know how to inhabit, right? I didn't have any like cultural points of reference, because we didn't have the internet those days, right? There was no way for me to be connected, being so far away. So after my dad passed, I think that was the first thing that I was like, okay, I need to make sure that I know not only who my dad was in this way, but who I am. I'm saying, I'd say, I'm Black, and then I'd say, and I'm Creek, but there was always that kind of insecurity around that identity. And so I think my close friends may have known, but it wasn't something I was like I said, I wasn't inhabiting it. Maybe because I also thought it didn't belong to me, really, right? I don't know, I try to think about my childhood and the times where I remember being like, oh yeah, I'm Native American, but again, because of the distance culturally and geographically, it just felt like it wasn't a real thing. So after my dad passed, I started talking to my grandmother a lot, because I felt like she was the closest thing I had to him.
Your grandma G,
And
right?
my grandma G, yeah, she's the closest like I had to him. And so I just asked her if we can talk. Like I want to know. I don't want to forget him. I don't want. Um, yeah, that was the goal. The goal was nothing more than to kind of decrease that distance. And so we started talking, and just the world kind of unfolded before me about like things I just never knew, which made me even more sad in a lot of ways because I felt like this was my inheritance that I had no access to, right? And it's not that my dad or my grandmother intentionally kept anything. It just, you know, um, it just is what happens sometimes, right? Like in one or two generations, things can get lost. And so, talking to my grandmother, you know, she would send me pictures. There was a family book that, I got to learn and read about people who came before me. And I mean, I'd see pictures of people who I would walk by and never know that they were my great grandmother or my, great great grandmother or whatever, because they are what we would say are phenotypically native, right? And so I had no clue than your creek, right? And so I just started to ask her a lot of questions, what about this? What about that? And she started telling me about her childhood and all these things. And I just thought to myself, I can't let this go. Like, this can't end with my grandmother. Like, I need to make sure that I know what being Creek or Muscogee in like, that's who we call ourselves. We call ourselves Muscogee. We were called Creek by the federal government, by settlers, because our tribe used to live along the creeks in Alabama and Georgia. So our tribe is the Muscogee Creek Nation. So I'm an enrolled citizen, and my grandma told me that everybody in my family up to me was enrolled, which I'm like, what is going on? Again, like finding out all these kind of things that I'm like, wow, I didn't know, and I even asked my grandmother, why we weren't enrolled. And then she was like, it's probably just because you guys are in, Oregon, and, the tribe office is here. Again, it's about how geography can disconnect people from place, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so it it was clear to me that there was a lot of work I had to do, So I got online, and like you said, I had taken a break. I had, my business page up, but I got off Facebook and Instagram as myself, maybe before my daughter was born, because social media was this place of like this point of distraction in a lot of ways. And I was like, I have this new person who I want to give my energy to, my life to, and I want to learn. I want to spend these years with her that I won't be able to, or she says she's a she, so I'll say she. That I know I won't be able to get back. So yeah, I kind of disappeared other than my business, but I got back online because I knew I needed to connect with community, with Muscogee Creek community and culture. Um, and so I started Melanin Muscogee as a way to be discreet, to kind of hide in the background, um,
Hmm.
to not like expose myself, right? As far as like, I didn't want a lot of attention. I was there to learn. I was there to, um, yeah, access culture, my culture, right? That was the intent, and that is the reason why even the name Melanin Muskogee, I knew it would be hard for people to find me.
Uh-huh.
Which I know you're laughing, and I know why you're laughing because now it
Yeah, what,
is
30 some odd thousand followers, you know?
it's yeah, and so I will say the evolution of being discreet to noun has a lot to do with as I started to really delve into culture and not just particularly with my tribe. There is this sense of pan Indigenous identity, like a collective Indigenous resistance, us supporting each other, even though we're individual nations, individual sovereign nations, us banding together in the spirit of refusing settler colonialism and white supremacy, right? So it's like, even if you just connect, like get online to try to connect with your people, you will quickly start to connect with the network of like folks who are, you know, resisting, proud, or just there to be in community online. So native Twitter, native Instagram, just like Black Twitter, Black, right? Um, and with that, being online, as we all know, then you come across the extremist, you come across um, a world of people who, yeah, who who aren't necessarily there for liberation of everybody. Like they are very much like my people only. I don't care what that costs the rest of everybody else.
Right, right. I just want not to cut you off there because we're gonna get to that.
Yes.
But I just want to bring it back because I was reading in an article on Indian Country Today where they had a profile on you and they talked about uh, just bring it back to your grandma G for a minute. That I think you said something to the degree of, before you didn't really feel like you had permission to really embrace your identity.
Yes.
And, when you talk about just as far as like this building community and finding others, because I think that's another thing I've noticed, like within like community within community and other people who are kind of like in this similar space of like, I didn't know that, like again, like I had permission to embrace this and I'm on this journey too. So can you just, as like before we get to, the pushback and all that drama, you just talk about, I guess, some of the more the positive community building. I think I saw something, was it I want to say Blindian Country was like a group or
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So, and I did want to like, so I will shift, I wanted to like preface it with like, I got online with, being exposed to all these people and how Melanin Muskogee got to this point where for that first time I did feel like, hold up, I heard some stuff and I was like, hold up, and specifically around Black natives, like folks who are at the intersection of Black identity and Native identity. And Native identity is both, I will say, a political identity as well as a racialized identity, right? But so I had heard some stuff online, and it was the first time that I felt like I had permission to say no, like Black natives inhabit this identity as well. And so I think the first thing I said was, Black natives are native, right? Like I just put out one little meme. I was private. I maybe had like maybe 100 or 2 people I was in community with at that point. And so one meme, and I had put my name under it, Melanin Muscogee. And because my account was private, it was just screenshot. And then you know how the internet works, right?
Mm-hmm.
More people kind of knocking at my door like, huh, right? And so I started originally, I feel like it was Black natives who were just like, okay, like, yes, like, this is what I've been trying to say. This one little sentence is what I've been trying to say, in my community for years, for whatever. And so I started to build community with a lot of Black natives. Um, Sometimes, people identify as Black native, Afro Indigenous, Black and native, right? So there are a plethora of ways for those of us who, descend from both Black and native folks identify ourselves. So building community with Black natives, and we just started talking about, shared experiences around the ways we're marginalized even within our own, like within Native community, and some folks even within Black community, how not people necessarily denying their Blackness, but like questioning also their nativeness, like, nah, you're just Black, those kinds of things like that. And so, really building community. So while I'm on this journey, more Black natives, more people who also, are quote allies or want to be, and recognize that, yeah, there are Black natives. And I'd hear something else and I'd be like, we need to address that. And so I'd make another little meme, around blood quantum, and blood quantum politics within the Native community, are rooted in this idea that over generations people become less Native, right? And this was a federal government policy that had Natives count their degree of blood on record. So like for, Black folks, we don't have a way to be like, when you submit a form to the federal government, I'm 3/4 Black. Like that's not a thing. Like with us, it's kind of the opposite way, right? It's a one drop. It has been about the one drop rule, and I will say that that's changing as well. Like we definitely in the Black community are having conversations about who is Black, and you know that's a total different subject. But anyway, I think that there are people navigating politics of who's quite Native enough. But for Black natives, that is a huge thing, because on top of blood quantum, we have our phenotype that we have to deal with. And that is rooted in white supremacy, which is completely anti-Black, right? And so all of us have learned this. So I will say that the Black native community, like we have been there for each other, like, right? And so yes, I have been in community with a couple folks who we started a page called Blending Country, where we can highlight Black native identity, experiences, events, all the things, because we realized that there needed to be a safe space for Black natives to see themselves. And whether we are reconnecting, those of us who are just now getting into the art cultural aspects of it, or have been, or grew up fully on the res, speak their language, entrenched in culture. And what we've learned is no matter where we are on that spectrum of like connectedness, we all kind of navigate the same things, right? It's like no matter how fluent you are in your language, people still see your phenotype and question whether you're worthy of your identity, whether you're worthy of your inheritance as a Native person. And so I will say that I wouldn't be able to be this far without that core group of folks who I do have authentic community with, who we uplift each other, who when we're going through hard things, we can run to each other, who can hold each other accountable, right? Like we, and that core for me, I feel like has grown over time. And so, yeah, I think being online has been beneficial for my growth in a lot of ways, and my growth and my identity as a Black and Muscogee woman, and I also want to shout out, Shawnee, Yuchi, Quapaw, Cherokee folks too, because, those are also people that I descend from. But I make sure to differentiate between descendancy and like which tribe I'm enrolled in, because that is how I respect tribal sovereignty. I don't say that I'm Cherokee or Quapaw or Shawnee or Yuchi because I'm not enrolled in either of those tribes. But those are also, my inheritance. That's the yeah. So it has been being online. Yeah, it wasn't meant to be what it is today. I will say, I think the pandemic and the death of George Floyd also kind of was a catalyst for a lot more people coming online to be in community, right? We're at home. We are faced with, the death of George Floyd. People are starting to have conversations about, you know, white supremacy and the Native community, settler colonialism in a way that we hadn't, because now we were all forced to kind of be online together. Like, and these things were kind of put in front of us for us to have to navigate. And so I think that, like I said, that forced growth. And I think as we start talking about Black Lives Mattering and, how Black folks are treated in this country, that same discussion was happening in Indian country, right? And it's like, I had this core group of folks who we've been talking about it, for a couple years. Like we had been, for the last couple years, we had been talking about it. And it kind of presented this space for us to talk about it out loud a little more. So even though I was kind of dropping memes every once in a while, like, you're worthy of your inheritance, I was speaking mostly to Black natives, like, blood quantum doesn't make you less. You look native if you are native, right? I'm just saying these things to remind natives, because I was hearing things contrary to that, and I wanted to buck up against that narrative. And I think I was starting to feel a little bit more courageous in my identity. I was learning to inhabit both equally, even though I was still and am still on like my own reconnecting journey, right? So you'll never hear me talk about being Muscogee online, because I'm still an infant in my, the cultural aspects of it. I still don't live in community, but because I have an online community, I have been learning a lot. I have been to ceremony now, and I was taking a language class, which I need to get back into, for a year, so it's like I feel like it's my responsibility, if I'm saying I'm a Muskogee, to do that work. So now, because of the internet, I have a way to be a part of a community that I didn't have as a young person, right? And so there's a little less feeling of, am I Muskogee, right? And I will say, like, which I said in that article, the thing that I rest on now is my grandmother. My grandmother is the one that told me, you're Muskogee. And whenever people question that, or whenever people like buck up against my identity, I remember my grandmother saying, like, she's proud of me for wanting to be Indian, because she said she didn't know that I was happy to be Indian, because for her identity is Indian, and so I don't think that she was upset at me or anything like that. She just figured that's what it was, like, my mother is a Black woman, and, my dad is Afro Indigenous. And so, his dad is Black. And so I think that she just kind of was like, maybe she doesn't see herself as Indian. And I was like, Grandma, no, I just didn't know. I didn't know it was to this. I didn't know. That's what it comes down to. And so, absolutely, I'm very much proud to be a Black and Native woman. And I very much will, for the rest of my life, inhabit both identities. But I have a lot of learning to do. And that's what Melanin Muskogee was meant to be.
I mean, I think, there's a lot of power you know, in modeling the journey to some
Yeah.
degree. And like, I think also, the way you talk about it, and I don't want to as characterize it necessarily as like downplaying, but you're saying like, oh, it's just kind of like memes, but I was put my media hat on here, and I think there's a lot to effective messaging, like concise and effective messaging, and I think you've clearly displayed like a gift for it with this, like just
Right.
and even just like repeating things like words like Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty, and like seeing those
Yes.
words repeatedly, like that does have, it has an effect. It's important. It's good to like just normalize these things for people. But also, again, I think a lot of people, as you've kind of talked about, there's a need for validation. There's a need to see yourself, and not just see yourself, but see yourself, standing proud. See people who look like you, who share your experience, and again, are proud of it, are standing in it, are also sharing what you're learning, and being I also just say like sharing it as, this is going to be a weird frame, but like as a human being, because I think
Yeah.
we always think people need to be like, well, how dare you speak on this, you're not this accredited expert, but
Yes.
like
Yeah.
most of us aren't. Like I think there's definitely value in expertise, like there's all conversations about climate change and vaccines and all that. We could talk, well, we could definitely talk about that, but I think there's also value in like human beings earnestly and honestly. I want to emphasize those, doing this research
Yeah.
and sharing it, again, not propagandizing, but actually like sharing real experiences, real thoughts, real research with people. But to that degree of like being super effective, of course, and growing community, unfortunately that also brings as you kind of alluded to earlier, not as much what's called unwanted attention, or a lot of pushback. And unfortunately you've had to deal with a lot of just a lot of pushback, I feel like, from a number of angles. Could you talk about what that's kind of looked like?
Yeah. I think before I answer that, I kind of want to address one thing you said because I think it's so important. Um, like messaging and repeating things oftentimes are also me speaking to myself, right? Because like I said, being that this identity isn't new, it's just this is where it is now for me, right? As a little kid, like I knew I was Muscogee, I knew I was Creek, but I didn't know how to inhabit being both Black and Native. I thought I had to compartmentalize my identities and, you know, maybe just give a shout out to my Native side every once in a while. But, now as I start to inhabit that, there is this sense of, imposter syndrome, right? Like, I'm not, who am I to speak to this? I didn't grow up in community. I didn't, I don't have any expertise, right? Like you were saying. And so I could say the things that I was saying, right? I didn't grow up on the res. But as you alluded to, there's this thing that we have learned about like expertise where it is valid. I think, like you said, in like scientific research and like, if you're coming to speak as an economist, but you don't, you haven't done the work, like who are you, right? And so that's why I say I never speak about being specifically Muskogee. One, because the sacred is sacred, right? You getting online and exposing the sacred to people who that doesn't belong to them is irresponsible. But also it was you know, I'm not an expert. Like I wouldn't speak to things, that I don't have permission to speak to. And so I think that I felt that way even as a Black Native woman. Like what, um, like who's given me permission to like even speak to this? And so I definitely have had to navigate this sense of imposter syndrome. But I think that I was trying to also be, like you said, my authentic self. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm navigating. This is what I'm hearing. And realizing that I wanted to counter that for myself, but also for other Black natives. Um, and so I think that the pushback in a lot of ways has been rooted in, let's just be blunt, anti-Blackness, right? Folks who can't imagine Black Native people existing because of our Blackness is the thing that then detracts from what being Indigenous means, right? Or specific. So I like to differentiate between Native and Indigenous because I think Indigenous is a global term. There are Indigenous people everywhere. But when we talk about Native people, oftentimes we're speaking specifically to like the Americas. And in this context, when I'm talking about today is, the US mostly, but there are times where, I feel like we're all having conversations about the Americas and the Caribbean when we say Native. So I feel like there's a lot of Native folks who have internalized anti-Blackness. I want to say they have internalized white supremacy, which anti-Blackness is at the root of that, right? So even though they may be fighting against, quote, white supremacy and the idea of settler colonialism, and for folks who don't know what settler colonialism is, it is about, it's the ongoing project of colonialism where the settler replaces the native, right? The intention is to genocide the native, and steal the land, right? And then whatever native folks are left to use their native identity for the benefit of the settler, of the colonizer, like of the institution. And so settler colonialism is a project. It is a continuing project which Native folks are enduring today. The removal of us off of lands, to using politics, um, policies like blood quantum to slowly do away with the Native, right?
Just a
And so
question,
I think that there,
real quickly about, because you talked about blood quantum earlier, but like, what is that as far as like, if someone's like saying like, what is that, like, what is the metric on that? I'm just genuinely curious.
yeah. So originally, when many tribes, I'll speak specifically to my tribe. The federal government had a policy once we were forced to walk on the Trail of Tears from our homelands in Alabama and Georgia to Oklahoma, which was considered Indian country. There needed to be a way to keep record of us, right? And so, and also to break up communal land, right? Like put natives on parcels, of land that eventually would get taken out from underneath, because the federal government knew if Native folks stay together in community, that's an act of resistance, right? So when, in order to document us, like for my tribe, the Dawes Rolls is this collection of, it's the original kind of record keeping, the census of our people. And so when people were listed on that roll, they, whoever, usually white men, would be like, is your dad Native? Is your mom Native? Yes, you're a full blood, right? And then from there, the kids would then be like, oh, is your mom full blood or is she half? And then from there, it was just like how they started to then keep record of like what people, how close to full bloodness you are, right? And I will say for those of us who are Black natives, oftentimes people just looked at us and were like, oh, they're Black. So they probably wouldn't even get asked, like, what's your blood quantum? Or what, is your mom Black? Is your dad, a full blood? And so a lot of times Black natives weren't listed authentically as who they were because most of the time people weren't able to self-identify. And even on the census, the census takers would come out and they would just say, we know this for Black folks, like, oh, who lives right there? What's their name? And they would just like write it down however they wanted to write it down. And they would say, oh, they would forget, they wouldn't even know people were in the household, right? Like there's a lot of problems with record keeping when people can't self-identify. And so even I have Black Native ancestors who were just listed as Black, like on the census. So blood quantum was, started with for my tribe, at least with the Dawes Rose. And then slowly it was a way to steal people's Native identity from them as a, using metrics that we use for like dogs and horses, right? To see like how close to purebred you are, right? But that was a means, again, of genocide. We call it paper genocide. So, so I think that this still operates in the Native community. Like who's closer to pure blood? Because there's this notion of like purity equates to authenticity, equates to who we were before colonialism, before contact. And there is this, for some folks, this romanticizing that happens. Like, let's return back to that. And I've heard people say there weren't Black folks before contact. It's like, okay, well, that's a fact, but they're Black folks now, right? Like, even if that is the truth, that truth doesn't minimize Black natives' authenticity nor our birthright. And I usually like to counter that argument with the world would have gotten small eventually. People would have, like, if it wasn't through colonialism, there would have been another way where folks would have eventually, got together. And when folks get together, folks do what folks do. They build community, they build, relationship, romantic, political, all these things, like familial, all those things, kinship. And so I think that, again, I want to say that I feel like a lot of this is in response to colonialism. Like this is people cope, they're trying to cope with it. But oftentimes it is perpetuating the very things that they claim to be addressing by saying, like, we're gonna gatekeep who can be Native and who can't be Native, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, if you're Native, right? There are people who have internalized white supremacy and settler colonialism to the point where they will deny kinship and familiar relationship to folks simply because they're also Black or a number of other reasons, right? Right. So, there has been, since I've been vocal, which, again, like, this was not my intent. And I think that this kind of just shows me who I am, no matter how much I try to like sit back and be quiet. Like, I just refuse to be oppressed. Like, I refuse to be a co-conspirator in my own oppression. And that does, no matter who it comes from, right? And I don't necessarily speak directly to individuals. If I see something online that I think is harmful, I try to make a meme or a one-liner that I push back against that idea, because I think that it's not just that one person who believes it. Right. It stems from something else. And so I'm trying to address ideologies that I know are deeply rooted. And I have to tell myself, like, you're pushing up against 400 plus years of stuff, and I think I had to learn that lesson the hard way, right? That, even as you're pushing back, there are people who are pushing back harder and aren't trying to do it in a way that's neat and open-minded. Like, they will use like the dirty tactics of war, which is what it feels like sometimes, right?
Oh, it's like,
full-on
campaigns. Like, people are really, like, they are coming for you.
Yes. And what it reminds me of is So when settlers started pushing west, when the federal government started pushing west to push Native folks off the land, they would hire immigrants, newly immigrated, white men, to go on these campaigns to like push the frontier. And they would give them permission to do whatever. But one of the main tactics was to engage non-combatant civilians. So they would like drive the warriors over to this place and fight them, while then another group of settlers would just go through the villages and just mass do whatever. Like it was no holds bar. And so I feel like sometimes in this fight, where I'm trying to, I don't even like to call it a fight. When I'm trying to communicate, like to humanize, as you were saying, to humanize Black natives, to ask folks, and I don't even know, I think it's moved from asking to asserting, because I don't need to ask permission to be Black and Native. Like I am that, whether you want me to be, no matter how much you dislike me, how much you dislike my voice, that's not something you have authority to take, right? And these are things that I've started to really be grounded in, the fact that people will assume they have authority they do not have. And so when people are being awful, I remind myself who I am, because of my grandmother, because of my great grandmother, and all the lineages of Native folks who came before me. There is nothing you can say, no matter how much you dislike me, that could take that from me. But I feel like, going back to the point of like that no holds bar, I feel like many of these folks participate in that kind of like war against Black Native folks. It's like, you will do anything, say anything. You don't know me at all, but you will make up any kind of story so that to discredit me, to discredit anything that I have to say. And that's really hard. I mean, there are days that it makes me feel like it's dangerous, right? It's like people can put you in positions where that could affect like your real safety, your real life safety, And early on when I was doing this, I didn't put my picture up. I didn't let people into my personal life. And I honestly, I don't even still, right? Like people know only a little bit, but I would put personal pictures up. And I will say that I've removed a lot of those, because what I realize is that my page also it really is about community. Like I don't want people to come on there just to be entertained. Like I am not for your enjoyment. Like, yeah, I think I've gotten to the point now. I understand what James Baldwin means when he says, "I'm not your Negro." Like I'm not your Negro, and I'm not your Indian. I am not to be used for you to, especially these folks who are dangerous and horrible, to use me to grow their accounts, to grow their hate, right? And so there will be times where people will comment on things that I say and tell me what I should and shouldn't be doing. And I have just started to say, I'm not your Negro. Like, I understand what James Baldwin means now. I am not here to be digestible, to be palatable. And I'm not, if you want to do that, if you want to talk about those things, you have a platform, start it, Like, I'm not stopping you. If that's something that you're really concerned about, you have permission. And it's not even me giving you permission, because I don't have that authority, but what you won't do is like come on my page and tell me, a Black Native woman, what it is I'm supposed to be doing. And I think that's also rooted in this idea of like Black folks are supposed to conform, and especially Black women, Black femmes, we are expected to bear other people's crap, but that's your issue, not mine. If you don't like me, just say you don't like me, and then there's the door. I can help you go that way if you want. I can block you. But I think that that's so easy to say. There are days where, dang, like it is rough to have to navigate people disliking you because you are asserting your right to exist, that you're asserting, you're asserting your humanity, you're asserting, your lineage and your culture. And I will say that this happens on both sides though, because there are a group of Black folks who also participate in the erasure of Indigenous people. They claim to be the original natives and Israelites and all these things, and they're just as terrible, And so you get it on both sides where, these anti-native Israelites, Hoteps, whatever they want to call themselves. I don't know what they call themselves. And I think there's maybe multiple names. They'll call me a sellout, or they'll call me a race traitor, or whatever, right? And so when I'm talking, I'm not trying to engage either of these two extreme folks, but they show up. And one of the things that I've noticed about the anti-native Black folks is that they will use Black natives who are actually Black and natives as proof of their theories about being the first, the original peoples, the Aboriginal peoples. They will use our identities and our pictures as proof of that narrative. And we're like, hold up, no, we are not, this is not what's it. But then the people on this side will say, see, look at them, they're on these pages and they believe these theories. And so there's this constant trying to stay safe from these two extreme ideas, extreme, very anti-Black folks, and then these extreme, very anti-Native folks, right? And even though there's moderates in the middle, just we kind of make fun of the idea of liberals, who are supposed to be these safe, open-minded people, that sometimes they will take from both of these ideas, right? And then it will get kind of mixed up into their own politics. And so I feel like I was a little naive, in thinking that one, there is, and I don't even know that I thought that oh, I'll be safe. It's more that I didn't think that I had to worry about being safe just for simply saying, I'm Black and Native. I never thought about people wanting to harm me or people wanting to send folks after me, and I think, like you said, I try to repeat Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty because I'm at the intersection of that identity. And I realize Black and Native folks have been fighting this since contact. Black folks being, the descendants of Indigenous peoples of Africa, dealing with colonialism and settler colonialism there, but then also dealing with being trafficked and theft, being stolen and brought then to a land where that another settler colonial project was happening and genocide was happening, right? And so both of our peoples have been enduring settler colonialism, and the projects of white supremacy. And I would add on top of that racial capitalism, where our bodies and our lands and our resources have been commodified, right? And so here in the Americas, and specifically in the US, we have all been navigating that. And one of the things we also have been navigating is the way these projects have pitted us against one another, right? To have us to dehumanize one another, to have us co-opt the hierarchies that exist. And I think that the thing about it, it's not something that we just willingly accepted. There were consequences for when we didn't accept it, for when we chose to refuse these systems. And I think that even happens today, right? And so I think that I'm asking Black and Native folks to understand that we have a common oppressor. And though we have some unique experiences and some unique situations that we have to deal with, all of this is rooted in the same thing, in the very same thing. And that we shouldn't, if we're saying we want a liberated Black future, we can't participate in settler colonialism, the erasure and the genocide of Native folks. And if we as Native people say that we want a sovereign Indigenous future, we can't participate in the commodification, the exploitation, and anti-blackness, of Black folks, right? We have to be very intentional about the future we're trying to build. And I think that our predecessors, our ancestors, we're fighting this very same, thing in a different way, but there's so much of it that is just a repeat, right? Like it's not new. Our our oppressors aren't that genius. They're using the same tactics. They're very cheap, bloody, no holds bar, but they're not genius. And so I think that we have to be willing to have that conversation of like, you know, yes, this has been going on for a very long time and it feels overwhelming that we're incapable of like moving past it. But I think if we can contextualize it as like, they're not that genius. They're just using the same tactics, right? But I think that we don't then have to deny what kind of real power they have, right? Like they have nukes and they have tanks and they have, just looking at Standing Rock or the other pipelines that we're trying to push against, they have legal systems, right? Um, that are very real forces against us, which the same thing our ancestors had very real forces against, starvation and, disease, right? Smallpox blankets, thinking about those things. And then all these like bloody wars that were no hose bar. So I'm not saying they're not genius without also contextualizing the real power that they have because of the weapons that they have, right? But I think I'm trying to address this, right? Like, let's not think of our oppressors as more genius than we, because that is a lie. In fact, I would argue that it's not genius. It's just really no holds bar tactics. Do whatever it takes, by any means necessary on their part, right? So yeah, it's the violence. I think that people who refuse to co-opt and participate in, white supremacy and settler colonialism, even within community, folks don't like it. They have expectations of me as a Black Native woman. They have expectations I will sit idle, and say nothing and be complacent and then also co-opt. Like I'm supposed to perform in a certain way. And so when I don't, I'm a troublemaker and I'm not a real Indian. Like I don't know what I'm talking about. But I refuse those, I refuse those ideas. And the the interesting thing is I'm not even here to fight those people. I'm here to like affirm Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty. I'm here to affirm Black Native identity. I'm here to celebrate the ways we have refused, both Black and Native folks. I'm here to continue envisioning a future that's better than this, to take up take up the baton in my generation to contribute to the conversations, the strategies, the movements of resistance. Like I feel an obligation to that. I feel like, Audre Lorde reminds us that, our silence won't save us. So being silent won't make me more liberated. Um, Even when people try to silence me, if I'm quiet, I'm still enduring the same violence. It just looks different, right? So, I mean, shout out to Toni Morrison and Audre Lorde and James Baldwin, who I feel like have been my teachers, my ancestors, in a lot of ways for my Black, teaching me about what it means to be Black and teaching me about movement, about resisting, boldly. And then I feel like my grandma and Native people in general, like we've come so far. And I mean, how dare I not bask in both of my peoples? How dare I not be proud to be both of my peoples. And I want to say that this makes me basking, me inhabiting, me loving being Black and Native brings me closer to my dad. I feel like in a lot of ways that cavern has gotten, the distance has gotten shorter. I mean, it still feels like he's very, very far, but I think that I had a dream once that I was pregnant. I was like 8 months, almost 9 months pregnant. And I felt like I was like, the baby was doing something, and I was like, I got to get to the hospital, but I didn't have my car for some reason. So I was like in rural, I think it was Oklahoma in my dream. So I like, walked over to the neighbor, and I was like, can I borrow your truck? I need to go to the hospital. And they were like, yeah, sure. And it was like this old mint green, like Chevy truck, like one of those 1960s with no power steering, whatever. Like this dream was so detailed and I have no idea why. But I get in this truck and it's like there's no power steering, so I'm like at this big belly and I'm driving and I'm like, okay, I got to get to the hospital. And as I'm driving, I see this guy on the side of the road next to like a John Deere tractor or something, and he's just kind of sitting out there like taking a break or sitting down. And as I get closer, I realize it's my dad. And in my dream, I think I was aware that he had passed, but it was like, oh, I get to see him again. Like, oh, okay. So I'm trying to slow down and I trying to turn around to like, talk to him, but the steering is so tough that I have to like drive up and go through this field and like force the truck to turn around. I finally get back to, my dad, and I was like, hey, and he says to me, you got any room in there for me? And I say, yeah, jump on in. And so we're driving to the hospital and we're silent, like we're not nothing. And then he just looks over at me and said, I just want you to be happy. And I woke up. And I kind of took that as like, he's proud of me and he just wants me to be happy, right? And so a lot of this, Melanin Muscogee is a culmination of refusing systems, basking in my identity, learning about the importance of community, because what I've understood, what I've come to understand is that solidarity and allyship cannot happen outside of community. Therefore, I don't owe people community who want to be violent against me, even if they look like me, even if they come from my peoples, right? I don't owe solidarity to people who want to harm me. And so even as my account gets bigger, like I don't want it to be about people following me. I am not a commodity. And these platforms oftentimes reward us with likes and follows as a way to like boost our sense of self. And myself can't be and then about how many people are following me and how many people like what I have to say. And I recently went on private because that's what I realized is that, I was on private originally. A lot of my words were getting, put out there via screenshot. And they got to the point where I couldn't sift through people to see, because, originally I didn't want a lot of people, but it got to be so much that I just went public. Like I don't have time. But again, I think I was a little naive in thinking that it'll be fine. Like, don't worry about it. But now I've kind of reverted back to being on private, and I see myself being on private kind of indefinitely. Maybe something will change my mind. But it's because I realize that online is not community. It doesn't equate to community just because you have a lot of people following. And maybe everybody doesn't deserve to hear what you have to say, right? Because people will try to commodify you. And as a Black body, I really understand that. Like, I understand the ways that Black people are often used to then sell product, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen with everybody, But I think that the history of Black bodies in this country has been that, and particularly Black women, Black femmes. Um, I think I'm just highly aware of the violence that having a Black body brings, especially when it's a body that's refusing its own oppression, right? My own oppression. And I don't want to walk around every day worried or concerned. I don't want to, like, I'm trying to get liberated, you know? And I ask myself, why are you doing this? Like, why do you feel the need to do this? Why do you feel the need to say this? And it always comes back to, these are my values, and I want to be free. I want Black folks to be free. I want Native folks to be free. And so I feel like, again, how can I be silent in my own oppression? How can I be silent in my people's oppression?
I mean, these systems, at the end of the day, these systems don't work for us. So again, there's just power. There's power in modeling that. And, and I think there's a lot of power in, again, not having necessarily a set pathway of saying, you said you started off private, and then kind of you went public, and then going back private again, saying, look, recognizing there's a lot of power in your representation. And I think there's a lot of people, who are better for being able to, see what you're doing. But at the same time, it can also be better for seeing, hey, I don't have to be a martyr. I don't have to be, just because we say, like you talked about the commodification of Black people and Black bodies. And even when people feel like they're, quote unquote, lifting us up, it's through, again, this demand of labor, this demand of service, this demand of martyrdom, or through this prism of struggle, as opposed to like as full human beings. A lot of people, I don't think, just because there's a whole rant about just how deep white supremacy goes and anti-Blackness in particular, where we just have trouble, even Black people, have trouble seeing ourselves as fully human, interacting and engaging with each other as, embracing our full humanity. But yeah, so again, the path isn't always linear. It is messy, but that is the journey. We're all trying to figure out these answers. I think I commented on one of your stories about just, just like, we don't have all the answers, but we're starting to figure out at least the right questions to ask to get us there. But I say all that to say, this might be a good point to wrap up this part of the interview. You had also kind of just talked about, how we start organizing, what we do have. You talked about how, recognizing that the people trying to oppress us, it's not that they're geniuses, but there is real power. And I want to continue that conversation for patrons in a little bonus segment we're going to do, talking about small power, talking about, the realities of, the systems we're going against, the, what the fact that a lot of these things we talk about as far as sovereignty, liberation, these policies around it are actually very popular, but what does it actually mean to get there? But like I said, we're going to talk about that in the bonus. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe to the patreon.com/BrucePointsat. But for this portion of the interview, we're going to wrap it up. And I want to say again, Amber, thank you so much for, the knowledge, the vulnerability really in your story that you're, willing to share, especially all things considered. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for valuing, my contribution to the struggle.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching. Please like and share and and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the latest videos. Thank you.